So how can you actually tell the difference between, a profound, lasting truth and just a viral conspiracy theory?
Right. That's the big question right now.
Because you, the listener, you are navigating your feeds every single day. You are just bombarded with narratives constantly.
Oh, absolutely. And it is overwhelming.
Yeah. Now, usually when we talk about measuring things in life, there is this expectation of precision. Like, if you want to know if a suspension bridge will hold weight, an engineer calculates the structural load.
They measure the tension of the steel cables.
Exactly. And the math just points and says, there it is. It is entirely binary. The bridge holds, or, well, it drops you in the river.
Right. It's clean. We really like our reality to be visible, to be neatly categorized by hard, unforgiving numbers.
We do. But then you step into the world of human belief. You look at how massive narratives form or how ancient religions start.
Or how massive political movements catch fire out of nowhere.
Yeah, and suddenly that structural precision is just gone.
Uh-huh.
We are looking at a historical landscape that is, well, incredibly murky.
It's the absolute definition of muddy waters.
Right. We tend to rely on sociology or psychology, or honestly just a gut feeling to explain why one specific idea changes the globe for thousands of years and another massive trend just fades out in a month.
Because usually when we analyze these movements, we just argue about the content of the belief itself. We argue over whether a miracle actually occurred historically.
Or if a specific political claim is factually correct.
Right, we debate the claims, not the underlying architecture.
Which brings us to the source material for today's deep dive, because it does something completely unprecedented.
It really does.
We have our hands on a fascinating, highly ambitious PhD dissertation draft, along with the rigorous, deeply critical feedback notes between the author and their academic reviewer.
In this paper, it attempts to formalize a structural, purely mathematical argument about how narratives and belief systems actually form.
Which is wild. The author uses heavy-duty mathematical and topological concepts to create an architectural blueprint. It's almost like an X-ray for human belief systems.
And our mission today is very specific. We are not here to debate religious theology,
Definitely not.
and we certainly aren't here to debate political opinions. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the mission is to look strictly at the structural properties of how narratives form.
Right, the actual math of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We are going to use the author's mathematical framework to stress test historical movements from ancient belief systems to modern political events and see what an artificial general intelligence, an AGI, might actually learn from them about tracking truth in a noisy world.
Okay, let's unpack this. The author introduces what they call the omega constraint framework.
The omega constraint.
And the brilliant, almost subversive move here is that it completely sidesteps those usual historical debates. It doesn't ask, did this supernatural event happen?
Right.
Instead, it asks, does the structure of how this narrative formed possess an anomalously low entropy?
Which is a key term.
Yeah. Now, entropy usually means chaos, right? Like molecules bouncing around a room. So low entropy in a belief system means what exactly?
It means the narrative isn't bouncing around. High entropy in a social movement means everyone has their own customized version of the truth, shifting constantly.
Like a massive game of telephone.
Exactly. Low entropy means the belief is forced into a highly rigid shape. The framework asks if a belief system acts like a constraint singularity.
A constraint singularity.
Yeah, a structure so tightly bound together that it resists fragmenting over time, no matter how much pressure is applied to it.
I want to get into the mechanics of this because the framework proposes 7 specific constraints. And if a narrative satisfies all 7, it achieves this highly rigid omega structure.
Right.
But instead of just listing them out, let's look at how they cause each other, because this is literally the blueprint of a world-altering belief. It starts with the first constraint, E, execution.
Meaning the movement suffers a public, terminal, undeniable defeat, a literal or metaphorical execution.
Which is fascinating because usually a terminal defeat just ends a movement. The leader is gone, or the prophecy fails.
Everyone packs up and goes home.
Exactly. So the only mechanism that keeps the narrative alive is the second constraint, our reversal.
That public, devastating defeat is somehow recalculated and interpreted by the followers as a massive transformative victory.
But wait, if everyone in a traumatized group tries to invent a reason why they actually won, wouldn't they all come up with completely different reasons?
They absolutely would.
Right. The narrative would just splinter into 100 different coping mechanisms.
Exactly. And that is why a true omega structure strictly requires the third constraint, C, convergence.
Ah, so they have to agree.
You must have multi-agent agreement. A massive number of different people have to all agree on the exact same complex reversal, independently and simultaneously.
Which naturally leads to the fourth constraint, S, stabilization. If you actually get that convergence, you have to lock it in early.
You really do.
You can't have the story evolving 50 years later to fit new cultural trends. It has to freeze in place.
But even if it freezes, what stops new members from watering it down later to make it easier to swallow?
That is where the fifth constraint acts as a filter, K, costly transmission.
The belief has to spread under severe persecution.
Or incredibly high personal cost, yeah. Costly transmission naturally weeds out casual participants who would otherwise dilute the structure.
But a group suffering together can easily just become an isolated, violent sect. To prevent that, you need the sixth constraint, M, moral coupling.
The ethical component.
Right. The narrative has to be deeply, fundamentally integrated with an outward-facing ethical system.
And finally, to keep that entire complex package understandable for thousands of years, you need the seventh constraint, X, compression.
There has to be a single dominant focal event that holds the entire theology, ethics, and reversal together in one mental image.
Wow. Okay, so to make this mathematically rigorous, the framework doesn't just guess at these values, it uses AGM belief revision.
Think of AGM like the underlying code for a GPS system.
A GPS system, how so?
Well, if you are driving and hit a massive roadblock, which is our execution constraint, how does your GPS recalculate the route without the entire map glitching out?
Oh, I see.
That's what AGM math measures in a belief system, how it recalculates contradictions without collapsing.
The text also mentions Kripke possible world semantics, which honestly sounds incredibly sci-fi.
It does, yeah, but it's a brilliant application. Imagine Kripke semantics like branching timelines in a multiverse.
Okay.
The math evaluates whether a belief system holds true across different hypothetical counterfactual.
So if we tweak one historical variable in an adjacent possible world, does the narrative shatter or is it robust?
Exactly. The author scores every movement from 0 to 1 on each of the 7 constraints using these tools. To satisfy the omega structure, a narrative must score above a strict 0.7 threshold across the board.
And crucially, it uses a geometric mean to calculate the final score, meaning it enforces joint satisfaction.
It isn't just an average.
Right. If you score a perfect 1.0 on 6 constraints, but a 0.1 on the last one, the math drags the entire score down below the threshold.
Precisely. You cannot compensate for a missing pillar by adding more weight to the roof.
It is exactly like an architectural stress test. The math proves that missing a single structural necessity collapses the building.
Yes.
But look, here's where I have to push back, or at least play devil's advocate for a moment. Isn't this entirely a case of descripted complexity?
What do you mean?
Well, if we are looking backward at history, aren't we just falling for survivorship bias? We're basically looking at the architectural blueprints of the buildings that didn't fall down and saying, wow, look how structurally sound these successful narratives are.
Right.
The messy ones just didn't survive to be recorded.
This raises an important question, and the reviewer of the dissertation actually pushes back on the author with that exact same critique.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they call it the Texas sharpshooter fallacy.
Yeah.
The idea of shooting a bullet into the side of a barn and then painting the bullseye around the bullet hole to make yourself look like a genius.
Yes, exactly that.
But the author defends the framework by applying it strictly to a primary case study that essentially sets the benchmark. New Testament Christianity in the first century.
And how does it do?
It scores a massive 0.877 overall.
Wow. That easily clears the 0.7 threshold. So it isn't just barely surviving the math, it's defining it.
It hits all the marks with unprecedented individual scores. For execution, an undisputed, historically acknowledged public defeat, the crucifixion.
Right.
For reversal, that specific defeat is interpreted as an ultimate triumph through the resurrection.
And for stabilization.
You have historical creeds locking in the narrative structure just 2 to 5 years post-event. That is lightning fast in antiquity.
And for costly transmission, you have 3 centuries of widespread martyrdom.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean for the survivorship bias argument? If I'm a sociologist, why couldn't I just argue that a naturalistic model, like a mass psychological coping mechanism, or just a really effective viral social network effect, why couldn't that natural human behavior just invent this 0.877 structure entirely on its own?
Because of what the dissertation formalizes as the constraint collapse theorem. The mathematics explicitly show that standard naturalistic models fundamentally fail to generate an omega structure. They mathematically max out around a score of 0.47.
Wait, I need to understand the mechanism there. Why do they cap out at 0.47? Let's look at the models they tested.
Sure.
Take an information cascade, which is basically when people just copy what others are doing because it seems popular. Why does that fail?
Well, an information cascade is like a stock market panic. If the first 3 people sell their stock, the next 100 people sell just because the first 3 did. They're entirely ignoring their own private financial data.
Right.
But a true reversal requires everyone to independently realize the stock is actually undervalued. A blind herd panic cannot generate independent, synchronized insight.
Because late adopters are just blindly copying.
Exactly. Cascades mathematically fail the reversal constraint.
Ah, I see. So a rumor can spread incredibly fast, but a highly complex theological reversal of a documented public execution won't hold its shape just through social gossip.
Correct.
What about people just trying to cope with severe trauma?
That is cognitive dissonance. And the math proves it suffers a catastrophic failure on convergence.
Why is that?
When a group faces a massive reality-breaking disappointment, cognitive dissonance reduction inevitably fragments. Think about it. People find local, individualized coping strategies.
I get it. It's like if you and 5 friends are outside a concert venue and they suddenly cancel the show.
Right.
One friend copes by saying, let's go to a bar. Another says, I'm just going home to sleep. Another wants to start a riot at the ticket booth. You fragment.
Exactly.
You don't all suddenly spontaneously agree on a hyper-complex alternative reality where the concert actually did happen on a spiritual plane.
Exactly. Now multiply your 5 friends by thousands of people.
Yeah.
Dissonance splintering means it never converges into a single, highly rigid agreement. It fails constraint C.
And the last naturalistic model, network phase transitions. Like when a movement suddenly goes viral, I'm guessing that fails on stabilization.
Yes, because it's constantly mutating.
Yeah.
A viral trend has to keep changing the story to keep the emotional temperature high.
Right, there is no early lock-in. The narrative constantly drifts to capture new audiences.
Precisely.
Okay, so the New Testament structure is mathematically anomalous, but to truly avoid that Texas sharpshooter fallacy, the author couldn't just test one religion.
Right, they had to cast a wider net.
They scored a top 10 list of historical movements to see if anything else naturally passes the test.
Yes, and this comparative base is where the model really proves its diagnostic power. When you look at the close competitors, the math is incredibly revealing.
Let's hear them.
Early Islam, for example, scores an impressive 0.793. It has incredibly high convergence and costly transmission.
But it doesn't cross the threshold.
No, it misses the overall omega threshold, primarily because it fails on X compression. There isn't a single dominant, hyper-compressed focal event like a crucifixion resurrection nexus.
The founding narrative is spread out over the prophet's entire lifetime and subsequent geopolitical conquests.
Exactly.
And Mormonism is on the list too, right? Coming in with a score of 0.731. But it fails on compression and, surprisingly, moral coupling.
Yeah, the structure just doesn't reach that tight constraint singularity.
But let's look at the dark side of this list. If cults show us the structural extreme of isolated belief, how do they score? The author evaluated catastrophic movements like Jonestown and Heaven's Gate.
What's fascinating here is how the math perfectly captures the pathology of a cult without making moral judgments.
How so?
Both Jonestown and Heaven's Gate have extreme scores in costly transmission, literally ending in mass suicide.
Right.
But their overall scores plunge well below the threshold, hovering around 0.62. Why? Because they have incredibly low moral coupling.
Oh, I see.
Their systems did not integrate with an outward-facing world-transformative ethic. They relied entirely on internal coercion, isolation, and ultimately self-destruction.
They structurally collapse under their own toxic weight.
Exactly.
But if cults show us the failure of isolation, what happens when a movement is broadcast to the entire world in real time? Here is where the source material gets deeply relevant for us today.
It really does.
They applied this exact framework to a modern, real-time natural experiment, the MAGA movement. And just to clarify, we are pronouncing that as MAGA, rhyming with TAGA, as explicitly requested by the structural parameters of the text.
Right, and it is vital to emphasize to you, the listener, that we are looking strictly at the mathematical scoring of narrative dynamics provided by the dissertation.
Absolutely.
We are entirely divorcing this from any political opinions, left-wing or right-wing. We are simply evaluating the structural math of how the narrative behaves.
Right, this is an objective stress test of narrative topology. So structurally, MAGA scores the lowest on the entire top 10 list, coming in at a dismal 0.457.
Yeah, it fails 6 out of the 7 constraints.
Scoring a 0.457 means it mathematically acts like those baseline naturalistic models.
Wow,
Let me guess, does it completely fall apart on stabilization?
it does.
Because looking at the timeline, the narrative never locked in. It kept shifting from election software theories to mail-in ballots to vaccines to shifting cultural targets. That is textbook narrative drift.
You nailed it. The math captures that drift perfectly. It suffers a catastrophic failure in stabilization, scoring a 0.35.
Wow.
Because the narrative is constantly updated to maintain engagement, it never achieves early structural lock-in. It also fails heavily on compression, scoring 0.30, because there are multiple competing defining moments rather than a single focal event.
But the most critical discovery from comparing MAGA to the New Testament is what the author calls the ER paradox. This completely reframed how I look at modern movements.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the ER paradox is the ultimate diagnostic signature that separates genuine structural truth from fragmented belief clouds.
It is the complex relationship between execution and reversal. Break down the difference between a pathological reversal and a genuine reversal, because this explains so much of our modern culture.
Okay, so in a pathological reversal, a movement achieves a high reversal score, but a very low execution score. MAGA is the dissertation's textbook example.
Okay.
It has high reversal, a massive unifying narrative of persecution and fighting back, scoring 0.85. But it has a very low execution score of 0.40. Why? Because there is no acknowledged, undisputed terminal defeat. The loss of the 2020 election is denied, not accepted.
Oh, wow.
Therefore, the reversal is structurally based on the denial of reality, resulting in a state of perpetual unresolved grievance.
It is claiming the victory of a resurrection without ever having the courage to accept the death of the crucifixion, so to speak.
Exactly. Contrast that with a genuine reversal, like the New Testament model. You have high execution, an undisputed, publicly acknowledged, humiliating crucifixion, scoring a massive 0.95.
Right.
This is paired with high reversal. The defeat is fully painfully accepted by the followers, and only then is it structurally interpreted as a transformative victory. Acceptance and transformation versus denial and reframing.
But let me ask you this. Doesn't the modern world kind of force this pathological state? Does the digital age inherently prevent stabilization?
That's a great question.
I mean, with bot infiltration, coordinated inauthentic behavior, and the zero-friction transmission of ideas on social media, aren't we just structurally doomed to generate what the author calls high degree of freedom belief clouds instead of rigid omega structures?
That is the exact implication of the MAGA natural experiment. The math suggests that even with charismatic leadership, massive social media amplification, and high emotional investment, a naturalistic network phase transition in the digital age just generates entropy.
That creates chaos.
Yeah, and it expands rapidly, but it drifts. It structurally cannot generate the constraint collapse needed to force a belief into an omega structure.
So if a movement proves that modern digital networks inherently generate high entropy belief clouds, what happens when we unleash artificial intelligence into that exact same network? Why does this deeply historical analysis matter for the future of AGI?
It comes down to a crucial concept called epistemic sovereignty.
Epistemic sovereignty.
Yes, an AGI needs a way to prune its hypothesis space. It has to figure out what is actually true in a sea of data.
Right.
If an AGI is programmed to rely only on viral consensus or the sheer volume of engagement data, it is mathematically guaranteed to fall for those exact same high-entropy belief clouds.
Right, because if an AI just scrapes social media all day, it's going to think whatever has the most likes and retweets is the foundational truth of human reality.
Exactly.
It will learn to believe conspiracy theories simply because they have high virality.
Precisely. But if you equip an AGI with the omega constraint framework, it can independently evaluate the underlying structure of a claim, completely ignoring its virality.
Oh, that's brilliant.
It can look at a massive data set and deduce, hey, this narrative has high degrees of freedom, constant internal drift, and lacks moral coupling. It is merely a naturalistic belief cloud.
So the framework acts as an immune system.
Yes, giving the AGI epistemic sovereignty, the ability to identify genuine, low degree of freedom truth tracking signals independently of what the digital crowd is screaming.
It's an architectural stress test for artificial intelligence. And this leads to the ultimate conclusion of the dissertation, the omega gap.
Yes, the math establishes a hard boundary. Naturalistic sociological models max out around 0.47.
While the New Testament achieves an unprecedented 0.877.
Exactly. The mathematical framework states that an advanced AGI would flag the New Testament's structure as a genuine historical anomaly. The AGI would recognize that naturalistic dynamics like information cascades, cognitive dissonance, and viral network effects simply cannot build this specific architecture.
Therefore, it requires an explanation entirely beyond standard sociology.
Precisely.
So for you, listening to this deep dive right now, how does this actually apply to your daily life? Because you certainly don't need to be an AGI to use this framework.
Not at all.
The next time you find yourself swept up in a highly compelling narrative, whether it is a massive restructuring at your workplace, a new political movement demanding your loyalty, or just the latest viral outrage dominating your social media feed, you can mentally run your own architectural stress test.
Run the omega constraints.
Yeah. Ask yourself, is there actual moral coupling here? Or is this just shifting fragmented outrage? Is there a genuine accepted defeat that we are growing from? Or is this just pathological denial disguised as victory?
It is an incredibly powerful diagnostic tool for navigating the modern information landscape.
Well,
But, if you step back, it also leaves us with a rather profound, perhaps unsettling philosophical question to consider.
what's that?
The framework mathematically suggests that true, lasting structural stability, the kind that changes the world for millennia, actually requires the group to publicly suffer and accept a devastating, undisputed defeat before it can truly transform.
That unavoidable execution constraint.
Right. So in our modern, friction-free, entirely pain-avoidant digital culture, where we can simply log on and deny our defeats in customized echo chambers, are we fundamentally, structurally incapable of ever producing an omega-satisfying movement again?